Coming up on Arirang News, top officials from South Korea will be meeting in person later this week with their counterparts in the United States and China, two key partners that have increasingly been at odds. The talks in Washington will include Japan and cover security issues. Signs of an economic recovery in South Korea. Industrial output was back to where it was before the pandemic last month, and business confidence is at a 10-year high. And President Moon Jae-in says now is the time for South Korea to become a global pace setter. The future, he says, needs to prioritize ESG, issues of the environment, society, and corporate governance. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. With tensions rising between the U.S. and China, South Korea is set for a string of meetings with both sides. On Friday, South Korea's national security advisor will hold talks with his American and Japanese counterparts in the U.S., while the foreign minister will meet with his Chinese counterpart in China on Saturday. Kim Min-ji reports.
South Korea's National Security Advisor Seo Hun will visit the U.S. this week for security talks with his American and Japanese counterparts Jake Sullivan and Shigeru Kitamura. Those talks will take place on Friday at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. Seoul's top office said that the officials will discuss Washington's new policy on North Korea and ways to strengthen trilateral cooperation. Biden administration is in the final stages of a comprehensive review of its North Korea strategy, which it says will lead to a new approach. The security officials are likely to have final consultations before the U.S. unveils the specifics. Seo will also hold a separate one-on-one with Sullivan to discuss the Seoul-Washington alliance and other regional affairs. And with Kitamura, he will discuss ways Seoul and Tokyo can cooperate to establish peace on the Korean peninsula. Seo's visit to the U.S. will be the first high-level trip since the start of the Biden administration. The string of meetings come amid heightened tensions on the peninsula following North Korea's recent missile launches and an ongoing geopolitical rivalry between the U.S. and China, with Washington seeking to boost its ties with regional allies, including Seoul and Tokyo. And perhaps putting South Korea in an awkward position. On Saturday, Seoul's Foreign Minister Chung Eui-yong will be with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi in the Chinese city of Xiamen. South Korea says the timing is coincidental. The officials will be discussing bilateral ties and issues related to the Korean peninsula. Seoul's foreign ministry says Jung's visit to China is meaningful as South Korea continues to engage in strategic communication with major countries around the peninsula. This will be his first in-person meeting with Wang. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And Seoul's foreign minister says he is ready to hold talks with his Japanese counterpart in any form, expressing hope that those talks happen sooner rather than later. There are a number of thorny issues between the two sides, many rooted in history. And when it comes to China, the foreign minister emphasized that South Korea does not need to choose between China and the U.S. Yoon Jung-min reports.
Seoul's chief diplomat Chung Eui-yong said he is willing to meet his Japanese counterpart at any time and in any manner, whether bilaterally or trilaterally with the U.S., amid icy Seoul-Tokyo ties over historical and other issues. Chung said during Wednesday's press briefing that the Korean government will sternly act on Japan's distortion of history and territory, but is ready for cooperation with Tokyo in other areas.
I will continue efforts for communication with Japan. Personally, I hope a South Korea-Japan foreign ministers meeting will be held early.
When it comes to any mediation by the U.S., Chung said Seoul will welcome any help from Washington, but basically, the two sides themselves should be working to resolve the issues. The foreign minister added that Seoul's foreign ministry has sent a senior diplomat in charge of Asia and Pacific affairs to Japan for talks at a higher working level. On the issue of South Korea's position between the U.S. and China, Chung said it is not a black and white choice, adding there are various areas for cooperation, including Korean Peninsula affairs, health issues, and tackling climate change.
Our basic stance is clear and never ambiguous. The South Korean government is firm that it will seek a harmonious South Korea-China relationship based on a strong South Korea-U.S. alliance. I say this repeatedly, that the U.S.-China issue is never our concern of choice. Neither the U.S. nor China has demanded that to us.
When the South Korean foreign minister sits down with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi this week, the two sides are to discuss Korean peninsula issues as well as bilateral issues, including a possible visit to Seoul by Chinese President Xi Jinping. Regarding North Korea's harsh criticism of the South Korean president for expressing concerns on the North's recent missile launches, the foreign minister said it is no help to the efforts for peace and security on the peninsula. While expressing regrets over Pyongyang's backlash, Seoul's foreign minister yet again urged North Korea to join the push for lasting peace on the Korean peninsula, as had been promised by the leaders of the two Koreas. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Yet more data is out suggesting the Korean economy is on its way to a recovery. Overall industrial output in February recovered to pre-pandemic levels, and business sentiment for this month reached an almost 10-year high. In terms of exports, volume in February was up on year for a sixth month in a row. Kim Jae-hee has the details.
South Korea's overall industrial output saw the steepest rise in 8 months in February, recovering to pre-pandemic levels. According to Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the overall industrial output in February soared 2.1% on month. This is the biggest rise since it increased 3.9% in June last year. But retail sales, which show consumption, fell 0.8% compared to the previous month. This marks the first decline since last November and the largest fall since last July.
Despite the slight decline in retail sales and facility investment, overall industrial production was very strong, mainly in the mining and manufacturing industries backed by strong exports. To sum up, the economic recovery was stronger in February than the previous month.
The Bank of Korea also said Wednesday that the business sentiment index for all industries rose 7 points on month to 83 in March, a high not seen since July 2011. And another data from the bank shows the country's export volume index in February rose 4.2% from a year earlier, marking on-year growth for the sixth consecutive month. Amid positive signs, Finance Minister Hong Nam-ki says the government will do its utmost to solidify the economic recovery by speedily pushing forward the Korean New Deal.
The second quarter is a crucial time to get the domestic economy on a full-fledged growth path. The government will mobilize all means to solidify the economic recovery trend, as well as resolve the difficulties in people's livelihoods.
But an expert notes that there are still concerns surrounding the economy.
We should be careful as uncertainty still exists, and consumption is likely to fully recover only when uncertainty surrounding COVID-19 is completely eliminated.
He added the government's utmost priority should be to quickly end the spread of infections and eradicate this uncertainty. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
And President Moon Jae-in says that now is the time for South Korea's economy to rebound and that the country needs to work to become a global pace setter. Speaking at an event to mark Commerce Day in South Korea, Moon said the government will spare no effort to support companies that enhance activities related to ESG, that is, environmental, social, and corporate governance matters.
이제 변화의 때가 왔습니다. 기업의 역할이 더욱 중요해졌습니다. 환경, 사회, 지배구조 같은 비재무적 성과도 중시하는 ESG라는 따뜻한 자본주의의 시대를 열어야 할 때입니다. 정부는 올해를 모두를 위한 기업 정신과 ESG 경영 확산의 원전으로 삼고 더 많은 기업들이 참여하도록 힘껏 돕겠습니다.
President Moon noted that ESG is a global trend aimed at sustainable development and said the government will establish formal ESG standards and provide incentives. He highlighted that South Korean companies already have visions for using renewable energy, going carbon neutral, and paving the way for new growth through green industries. This was the first time for the president to take part in the Commerce Day event, which was scaled down this year due to the pandemic. And of course, the pandemic has changed the way that we teach and learn. Tutoring jobs have ramped up on increased demand for safe learning and quality education in the pandemic. This has led to an unexpected silver lining for many job seekers in South Korea who are in their 20s. Min Soo-kyun reports.
Esther, a graduate from Peksuk Arts University, says she loves teaching just as much as she enjoys singing. She began working as an English tutor in college, and what started off as a part-time job has now become her bread and butter. The 25-year-old says she decided to pursue this path as it was incredibly rewarding to teach students something new and build their confidence. What's more is that she's not the only graduate to turn to tutoring.
While there are those who are preparing for job recruitment sessions by large companies, many people I know work as tutors and look for students through tutoring apps. Also, there are others who work at cram schools as instructors.
Private tutoring in South Korea has always been in high demand. In fact, one tutor says that because of this, tutoring has served as an opportunity for many job seekers in their 20s.
Since it is difficult to find a job, it seems that a lot of graduates and those about to graduate have turned to the private education sector for work. Even for me, because I major in a field where it's hard to find a job and there's not that many job opportunities these days, I think many more people turn to tutoring.
With the outbreak of COVID-19, tutoring is seeing something of a boom. Since schools and private cram schools were temporarily closed due to strict social distancing measures last year, parents who feared their children could miss out on learning turned to private one-on-one lessons and remote classes.
There are still many parents who remain cautious about group lessons. So the number of parents choosing to take online classes or one-on-one private lessons has increased. In particular, in-home tutoring rose about 20% compared to pre-COVID-19 level.
The demand for private tutors is not only good news for young job seekers, but also for those who've been in the industry for a while.
Since the outbreak of COVID-19, I have had a lot of tutoring requests. I really have more students to teach than before.
The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the education environment, and this change is likely to stay. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
The Korea Fair Trade Commission has announced a fine for the local unit of Apple for hampering the FTC's probe several years ago into unfair business practices by the company. And the FTC has also decided to send the obstruction charge to the prosecution. The agency today handed down a fine worth around $260,000 for obstructing the probe in 2016, specifically for blocking investigators from its company intranet, and then the next year refusing to hand in documents related to a local disruption of Apple's services. The 2016 probe was looking into allegations that Apple had pressured South Korea's 3 mobile operators into paying the costs of Apple's TV ads and phone repairs for their customers. Apple proposed a plan worth around $88 million to rectify those 2 issues, but the obstruction charge was separate. South Korean automakers are rolling out new electric cars to try and grab a foothold in the global market that's so far been dominated by Tesla. The newest model, just unveiled by Kia, is a sporty crossover called the EV6. Seo In-kyung reports.
Kia unveiled its first all-electric car, the EV6, yesterday at local time. It is a symbolic model developed under Kia's plan to have 40% of its total sales generated from electric cars by 2030. Kia's president said during an online briefing that the vehicle will come in 4 different models: standard, long range, the GT line, and the high-performance GT. The first 3 will be introduced in the second half of this year, and the last one will be launched in the later half of 2022. The EV is priced between $40,000 and around $60,000 depending on the model. The company noted it aims to sell 13,000 units in Korea and 17,000 units overseas. Next year, its sales target is 100,000 units globally on an annual basis. Pre-order for domestic customers is available from today. Hyundai Motors also introduced its first electric vehicle, the Ioniq 5, last month. The number of pre-orders in the domestic market for the model reached around 24,000 units on the first day alone, and within only 9 days, it exceeded 35,000. The high popularity pushed the figure well above the company's annual sales goal of 26,500 units. The EV6 and Ioniq 5 are both equipped with Hyundai Motor Group's electric global modular platform. Kia's new electric vehicle embodies the appearance of a regular engine-driven car, while the Ioniq 5 comes with futuristic electric vehicle-like design. World electric vehicle makers have made material investments, making moves to solidify their leading positions. Tesla and Volkswagen announced their plans to produce the batteries in-house. The move largely aims to lower battery costs and make electric cars more affordable and attractive to the public. In the electric vehicle market last year, Tesla ranked first with over 44,000 units sold, and Hyundai Motors ranked fourth, following Volkswagen and General Motors. It appears automakers around the world are trying to take the lead in the electric market, which advanced as much as 45% last year. Seongyung, Arirang News.
By the year 2035, it might be possible to travel the more than 300 kilometers from Seoul to Daegu in a flying drone taxi and make the trip in about an hour. The Transport Ministry on Wednesday laid out a roadmap for developing technology to commercialize urban air mobility. The first objective under the plan is to ensure safety by considering various risks, such as weather changes and collisions. By 2035, the ministry expects roughly 200 routes to be in operation and about 50 vertiports to be installed nationwide. Also by the target year, the fare for traveling 1 kilometer by drone taxi is expected to be a little more than $1 per person. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that, I'm joined on the line by Professor Ernst Lee from the Hanyang University School of Business. Professor Lee, good to have you back on.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Well, a big story right now in the stock market is the downfall of the hedge fund Archegos, run by the Korean-American Bill Hwang, which defaulted on its margin calls last week, and its brokers having to sell Archegos' shares at a loss. The SEC has been monitoring the situation, but investors are worried about how deep this all goes. Tell us about the situation, Professor.
Well, I think the SEC is viewing this as a warning signal because actually, maybe they can recall the bad memory of year 2009, subprime mortgage stemmed the global financial crisis happened. At that time, as you remember, the interest rate was very low and there was a lot of ample liquidity in the market. That escalated systematic financial crisis because investment banks were seeking for higher returns. They created derivative products. Similarly speaking, real sector economy at this moment in the United States is still in sluggish mode. As take an example, there still lies a discrepancy between stock market and real sector economy. Looking back, U.S. GDP growth last year, I know this is because of pandemic, but recorded minus 3.5%, while China GDP rose by 2.3%. Given the situation, there are still ample liquidity, and the government is driving to supply fiscal stimulus package. That gives the impression to the market that interest rate will soon rise because based on 10-year U.S. Treasury bond is marking 1.77%, which is the highest level in 14 months. That gives escalated concern about potential bubble. And then that is the concern about your security exchange. And the product itself, of course, every product has a plus and minuses point, but I think it is critical to understand the depths of the risk at this moment. And for financial institutions, given the low interest rate environment, I think it was they were very much tempted to buy this kind of product that uses a lot of 10 times, almost 10 times, or up to 90% leverage ratio based on margin. So I think this is the I think SEC may view this as a warning signal, and they will investigate how this will escalate, or the market can endure what is current status quo. I think this is a very critical moment.
Well, if we could talk about another growing risk issue in the Korean markets, there's a growing trade in CFDs, or contracts for differences. These are trades using margin, as you were just talking about, that is debt, to buy or sell not an actual security, but the difference in the price of it between the opening and the closing. And this is something, by the way, that is not allowed in the United States, for example, but is causing some concern in Korea. Tell us about the CFD trade and the risks people are concerned about.
Well, CFD trading, a contract for difference, is similarly speaking, likewise, the case Bill Hwang is made. Because in Korea, each individual investors are not allowed for short selling of the stock, but only institutional investors are allowed. So, given the situation, government has opened another window for individual investors, which is a CFD. If you have a margin deposit, you can leverage out principal amount up to 900%, and that's non-taxable. But the thing is, this is high risk, high return product. So this is a very, very sophisticated and high risk taking product. So only those people who are financial expert, even he or she is a financial expert. Well, we have to look at the macroeconomy. Korea is a small and open economy, which is coupled with United States economy and global economy, and it's very, very delicate products. So, but with the current atmosphere in the market, that stock market is booming, a lot of young professionals or young people who join in the job market has an investment in CFD contract for difference. I think this is the moment that we have to look back. From my personal observation, I don't think this is a product for just common people who just trade in the stock market, not in a full understanding of the nature of the product itself.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to see so many people involved for the first time. Perhaps caution is something we all might want to heed. But to zoom out macro for a minute, Korean retailers are putting on some seasonal sales. Now it's springtime. The economy, of course, is still fragile, but there has been an increase in consumer confidence, now slightly more optimism than pessimism. Do you think things will continue in this direction, or where are we going now?
Well, purely personal observation, I don't think this trend may continue long. I see this as emotional consumption pattern. One, I think short-term sales may go up because a lot of pressure on spending, and then people couldn't go out of the house or workplaces. They could not travel. So in response, maybe in appreciation for their pressured consumption mind, while the emotional consumption pattern may rise, and short-term, I think these sales may go up. But going back to the fundamental, Korea is, yes, still among OECD countries, we are better than other countries, but it does not mean that we are making plus growth, still in the minus area. But among other OECD member countries, we are better than other countries in terms of the minus. So I don't think this is the good sign. But in the trend-wise, I don't think this consumption may continue. Why? Because it's not backed up by robust economic growth. As I said, U.S. 10-year Treasury bond is recording 1.77%, which is the highest level in 14 months, and which will escalate the pressure for interest rate, U.S. interest rate rise, which will have negative impact to Korea. I mean, the negative means Korea will have to follow U.S. interest rate, and which will be very much negative for those investors who have done CFD contract for difference and who have been spending a lot of money. So the growing concern may dampen consumption atmosphere. But short term, yes, I would agree. But in the medium and long term, personally, I don't agree with the trend.
Tying it all together there with the CFD at the end for us there, Professor Lee, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today, as always.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching.